The wind carried the scent of dust and sagebrush across the valley that day, the kind of dry air that made every sound sharper and every heartbeat louder. The sun hung low, burning gold over the wide plains of Arizona Territory, where the land stretched farther than a soul could see. It was a place of quiet danger and fierce beauty, where men carved their lives out of rock and women learned to keep secrets close to their hearts. I had been raised here among the fences and the fading paint of our ranch house, with the constant reminder that survival meant loyalty to family, to blood, and to the line between us and them. But I had never been good at obeying lines. I was 17 when I first saw him. He stood on the ridge beyond our fields, still as a statue, his dark hair moving slightly with the wind. My father's men had been searching the hills for signs of Apache movement for days, and when I saw that lone figure, something inside me froze. I should have shouted for help. I should have turned back. Instead, I watched him for what felt like forever. Even from that distance, I could sense something different about him, not a threat, but a quiet strength. Then, as if he knew I was there, he looked straight at me. That look would follow me for the rest of my life. In those years, tension between settlers and Apache warriors was at its sharpest. Every raid, every burned wagon, every body buried in hard soil deepened the hatred on both sides. My father had fought in the territorial militia. To him, the Apache were not just enemies. They were the reason my mother slept with a rifle near the window and why he rode out every morning with a gun strapped to his hip. The stories told around our dinner table were always about revenge and warning, how trust could get you killed, how kindness was weakness. And yet, after that day on the ridge, I found myself drawn toward the borderlands of our property, where the rocks turned red and the mesquite trees grew thin. I told myself I was just curious, but the truth was, I wanted to see him again, and I did. It happened 2 weeks later near the old creek bed, where the water still ran cool even in late summer. I had gone there with a basket to gather herbs for my mother's remedies. I remember kneeling by the bank, my hands in the water, when I heard the soft snap of a twig behind me. I turned, heart pounding, and there he was closer this time. His eyes fixed on me with the same calm intensity. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then, in a voice low and rough from disuse, he said, "You should not be here." His English was clear, but heavy, each word careful. I wanted to speak, to ask his name, to tell him I meant no harm, but my voice failed. When I finally found it, all I could say was, "Neither should you." He smiled then, a fleeting, quiet smile that didn't reach his eyes. I thought I saw sadness there, or maybe curiosity. Before I could say another word, he was gone, disappearing into the brush as if he'd melted into the earth itself. That night, I could hardly sleep. I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me, not like the men in town, not with suspicion or judgment, but as if he saw right through the walls I didn't even know I'd built. I didn't tell my father, of course. He would have locked me inside if he'd known. But every day afterward, I found myself wandering back to that same creek, hoping without admitting it that he would return. He did. Over the weeks that followed, we began to speak more. At first, only a few words, simple things about the land, the weather, the animals that moved through the hills. He told me his people called this place the Heart of the Wind. I told him how my mother missed the green fields of Kentucky, where she'd been born. Our conversations were short, careful, but each one lingered long after he was gone. There was something unspoken between us, something neither of us dared to name. I learned that his people had lost much to the soldiers and the settlers. He spoke of villages burned, of children taken, of promises broken by men in uniform. I had grown up hearing my father say the same things in reverse, that the Apache raided out of cruelty, that they could not be trusted, that peace was only possible when they were gone. Listening to him, I realized how easily both sides had been taught to hate. There were nights when I sat by my window and wondered what he was thinking. Out there in the wild places beyond the river, I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but the truth was, I cared too deeply already. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. One evening, near the edge of autumn, I found him waiting for me by the creek again. The air smelled of rain and mesquite smoke. He looked more restless than usual, his gaze darting toward the hills. "You should stay away," he told me. "My people are moving through this valley. It is not safe for you here." I shook my head. "Then why are you here?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, almost to himself, "Because I wanted to see you once more." My heart felt like it was caught between fear and hope. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I felt the same, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. We stood there in silence, the world shrinking down to the space between us. That was when I heard the sound of distant hoofbeats. My father's patrols were returning from their scouting trip, riding the ridge above the creek. I turned toward the sound, panic rushing through me. He caught my arm gently, but firmly. "Go," he whispered. "If they see me, they will kill me. And if they see you with me, they will not forgive you." I wanted to protest, to tell him I couldn't just walk away, but I saw the truth in his eyes. If anyone found out, if my father even suspected, it would destroy everything. Still, as I backed away, I couldn't stop looking at him. Something inside me broke open in that moment. Something I couldn't name but couldn't deny. I reached for his hand, just once, and he let me. His touch was warm, steady, alive. And before I could stop myself, before I could even think of what it meant, I leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a breath, but it felt like time itself had stopped. I could taste the danger in the air, the weight of everything that stood between us. When we pulled apart, he looked at me with something like sorrow. "This will bring only trouble," he said softly. I knew he was right. The world we lived in was not made for love like that. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing through the valley. I turned and ran, clutching my basket, heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I didn't look back until I reached the edge of our land, and by then, he was gone. That night, as thunder rolled over the mountains and lightning split the sky, I sat by my window and realized the truth that would shape everything that came after. I had fallen in love with the one man my father would never forgive, the man my people called an enemy, and though I told myself I would never see him again, deep down I knew that fate had already decided otherwise. Somewhere beyond the storm, he was out there and our story was only beginning. The days that followed passed in a blur of silence and unease. The kiss haunted me like a secret too heavy to carry and yet too precious to let go. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in the fading light. The way the shadows played across his features, the quiet warning in his voice. I told myself it had been a mistake, a moment of madness brought on by loneliness and curiosity. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It had awoken something inside me that refused to be silenced. My father came home 2 nights after the storm. His boots caked with mud, his eyes dark from sleepless patrols. The men had found signs of Apache movement not far from our grazing land footprints. Charred remains of campfires, and a single carved spear point left as a warning, or perhaps a message. He slammed it down on the kitchen table, his voice sharp as flint. "They're getting bolder," he said. "We'll have to tighten the borders." My mother tried to calm him, but his anger ran too deep. I kept my head down, hands trembling as I poured water into the basin. I didn't dare meet his eyes. If I did, he might have seen everything I was trying so hard to hide. After that, life at the ranch changed. Father kept the men riding farther each morning, setting traps near the creeks and posting sentries along the ridges. The sound of gunfire echoed more often, carried on the wind from somewhere beyond the hills. Fear became a quiet companion in our home. At night, when coyotes howled and the shutters rattled, my mother would whisper prayers beneath her breath. I could see the worry lines deepening on her face, the weariness settling into her bones. Yet even as danger grew closer, I felt an invisible pull toward the place I had been told to avoid. The creek became a part of my thoughts, a forbidden border between 2 worlds I could no longer keep separate. I wanted to see him again, to understand why he had risked returning that day, why he had spoken as though there was something more between us than chance. But the fear of what it might cost kept me from acting on it. One afternoon, while I was hanging laundry behind the house, I saw dust rising along the road. A group of riders was approaching, their horses lathered and weary. My father came out to meet them, his rifle slung across his shoulder. The men dismounted quickly, speaking in low, urgent voices. I recognized one of them as Deputy Cole from town. His face was grim. "There was an ambush near the old trail," he said. "2 of our men are dead. It was Apaches. No question about it." I froze where I stood, my hands clutching a damp sheet. The words hit me like a blow. My father's expression turned to stone. "Then they've declared war," he said. "We'll answer it." That night I lay awake listening to the restless sounds of the ranch, the horses stamping in the corral, the distant murmur of voices from the bunkhouse. I wanted to believe the man I had met by the creek couldn't be part of it, but I didn't know his world, not really. I didn't know his people's struggles, their pain, their reasons. All I knew was the quiet strength in his eyes and the truth I had felt in that brief, dangerous moment between us. Days turned into weeks, and the valley began to feel heavier, as though the land itself held its breath. Rumors spread through the nearby town, raids on outposts, missing livestock, smoke rising in the distance. My father grew harsher with each passing day. He doubled the guards, forbade me from leaving the property alone, and started riding out before dawn. I pretended to obey, but my heart wasn't built for walls. One evening, I slipped away toward the creek. The sun had already dipped below the ridge, leaving streaks of violet across the sky. I followed the familiar trail, every step a mixture of fear and longing. The air was still, the kind of stillness that comes before something happens. When I reached the water's edge, I stopped and waited, half hoping, half dreading that he would appear. Minutes passed. Then, from the shadows across the creek, he stepped forward. He looked different this time, tired, guarded, as though the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders. "You shouldn't have come," he said softly. "I had to," I whispered. "They're saying there was an attack. People are dead." "Was it your people?" His jaw tightened, and he didn't answer at once. "My people are fighting to survive," he said at last. "The soldiers broke the last agreement. They took more land, burned more homes. What choice do we have?" I wanted to argue, to tell him there had to be another way, but the words felt hollow even as they formed. I could see the truth in his eyes. I had grown up on stories that painted one side as good and the other as evil. But now, standing before him, those lines felt blurred beyond recognition. He stepped closer, his expression caught somewhere between anger and sorrow. "You live in a house built on our land," he said quietly. "You are protected by men who hunt my people, and yet you come here knowing what it means." "I don't come here as an enemy," I said, my voice trembling. "I come because I can't stop thinking about you, about what's right and wrong, about how none of this makes sense anymore." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The creek murmured softly between us, carrying away the words we couldn't say. Then he said something I didn't expect. "If your father finds out, he will not only hate me, he will hate you too." I knew he was right. My father's heart had been hardened by years of loss and war. He didn't forgive, and he didn't forget. But the thought of never seeing this man again, ever understanding what drew me to him, was unbearable. "Then let him hate me," I said quietly. "I'm already lost to him." He looked at me for a long time, as though trying to decide whether to believe me. Then he reached into a small pouch tied to his belt and drew out a piece of carved wood, smooth and worn. "This belonged to my brother," he said. "He was killed 2 winters ago, near the ridge. Keep it. If you ever find yourself in danger, show it to my people. They will know what it means." I took it carefully, feeling the warmth of his hand linger on mine. Before I could speak, a sharp sound broke through the silence, the crack of a branch, followed by distant voices. My heart leaped into my throat. My father's patrol was near. He caught my arm, his eyes flashing with alarm. "Go," he said urgently. "They must not find you here." I hesitated for one heartbeat too long, then turned and ran through the brush. The sound of boots and shouts echoing closer. My skirt snagged on thorns, my breath burning in my chest. I didn't look back until I reached the clearing near the edge of our fields. The sky had gone dark, and a thin trail of smoke was rising from somewhere beyond the hills. That night, the men returned to the ranch with grim faces. My father's sleeve was torn, his hat lost, his rifle still smoking. "We caught one of them," he said, his voice like gravel. He wouldn't talk. Tomorrow, we'll make him talk. The words froze the blood in my veins. I didn't have to ask who he meant. I knew. I spent that night pacing my room, every creak of the floorboard sounding like thunder. I wanted to run to the barn, to take a horse and ride out into the darkness to find him, to see if it was truly him they had captured. But I couldn't move. My mother sat in the kitchen, praying softly. My father's shadow passed by the window, pacing the porch like a man guarding his fury. When dawn came, I slipped outside before anyone was awake. The air was cold, heavy with mist. I crept toward the barn, then to the corral where the men had tied their horses. Beyond the yard, near the supply shed, I saw 2 guards standing near a rough wooden pen. Something or someone was inside. I couldn't see clearly through the gaps, but I heard a voice, low and steady, refusing to speak despite the questions thrown at him. My heart clenched. It was him. Before I could think, one of the guards turned, and I ducked behind the fence, pressing my hand against my mouth to keep from gasping. My father's voice rose from across the yard. At sunrise, we'll deal with him. If he knows where the others are hiding, we'll make him tell. The words hit me harder than any blow. I knew what that meant. I stayed hidden until the sky began to pale, my thoughts spinning, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't let my father do it. Not to him. Not after everything. As the first light broke over the mountains, I made a choice that would change everything. I turned toward the creek, clutching the carved token he had given me, and whispered into the wind, "Hold on. I'll find a way." Somewhere beyond the barn, a hawk cried out over the valley. The sound carried far into the hills, fading into the silence that always came before the storm. The sun rose slow and pale that morning, washing the valley in a thin gold light that made every shadow seem sharper. The air was still, but the ranch was restless. Men moved back and forth across the yard, their voices low and tense. Horses stamped nervously, sensing the weight of what was coming. I stood by the window, my fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the men gather near the pen behind the shed. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I knew he was there. I knew they would not let him live if I didn't do something. Inside the house, my father was loading his rifle, the sound of metal against metal echoing like a drumbeat. "He's just one of them," he said to my mother, who stood by the stove wringing her hands. "But if he knows where the others are hiding, we can put an end to this once and for all." My mother didn't answer. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. I could tell she didn't want to see what was coming either. She just whispered, "Be careful," though I wasn't sure if she meant for him or for herself. I slipped outside while they were still talking. The morning air bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. Every step toward the shed felt heavier than the last. I could see 2 guards standing by the door of the pen, rifles slung over their shoulders. They didn't notice me at first. I stayed close to the wall, heart racing, and waited until one of them walked off to fetch something. The other leaned against the fence, yawning, his hat pulled low. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement inside the pen. He was sitting on the ground, hands bound, a cut above his brow and dirt streaking his face. But even then, he looked unbroken. His eyes lifted toward me through the slats, and for a moment, everything else faded away. I mouthed a single word. "Wait." He gave the faintest nod. I couldn't free him then, not with the guards so close. I had to think of another way. I knew that once my father came back from the house, it would be too late. He'd get his answers one way or another, and that would be the end of it. I turned and ran back to the barn, my mind spinning. There had to be someone who could help, someone who might still listen. That was when I thought of Daniel. Daniel was one of my father's hired men, a quiet, fur-minded man who'd worked the ranch since before I was born. He'd always been kind to me, never asking too many questions when I slipped away to wander the edges of the property. More than once, he'd warned me when my father's temper was running high. If there was anyone who might understand, it was him. I found him saddling his horse, preparing for patrol. "Daniel," I said, trying to steady my voice. He looked up, surprised. "I need your help," I whispered. He frowned. "You shouldn't be out here." "Your father? It's important," I cut in. The man they caught. He's not what they think. He saved me once. It wasn't exactly true, but it was close enough. Daniel's brow furrowed. Saved you? When? There's no time to explain, I said. If they hurt him, it'll only make things worse. Please. You know how my father gets when he's angry? He looked torn. The seconds dragged. Finally, he muttered, if I help you and your father finds out, it'll be both our hides. I'll take the blame, I promised. Just don't let them kill him. Glanced toward the shed, then back at me. I'll see what I can do, he said quietly. I stayed hidden near the fence, waiting. Daniel approached the guards, speaking in a low voice I couldn't hear. They argued for a moment, but Daniel's calm tone must have worked. The younger guard left to fetch more rope, and Daniel knelt near the pen, pretending to check the prisoner's bindings. Under his breath I saw him say something, then slip a small knife between the ropes. My breath caught. He was giving him a chance. Then my father's voice thundered from across the yard. What in God's name are you doing, Daniel? I froze. The guard snapped to attention. Daniel stood, trying to stay composed, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Just making sure he's secure, he said evenly. My father's eyes narrowed. He didn't believe him. We'll see about that, he said, stepping closer to the pen. He looked down at the man inside, his jaw set. You've got one last chance to tell me where the others are hiding. Make it easy on yourself? The Apache looked up at him, silent, defiant. My father's temper flared. You people think you can take what you want and vanish into the hills, but you're wrong. This land isn't yours anymore. Something in those words twisted deep inside me. I thought of the stories he used to tell about justice and honor, about defending our home. But standing there, hearing him now, it didn't sound like justice. It sounded like vengeance. Before my father could say more, a voice shouted from the ridge, one of the patrol riders returning. Smoke, sir. To the north ridge. They've set fire to the pasture. Chaos broke out. Men grabbed their rifles and ran for their horses. My father turned, barking orders. In the confusion, Daniel gave me a look sharp, meaningful. Then he whispered something to the man in the pen and slipped away with the others. It was my chance. I waited until the yard was nearly empty. Only one guard left behind to keep watch. I crept along the fence, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The guard's back was turned. I picked up a small rock and threw it toward the barn. It clattered against the wall and he spun around, moving toward the noise. I didn't hesitate. I ran to the pen, grabbed the knife Daniel had left behind, and sawed at the ropes. His hands came free. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. Neither should you, I said. Go. He hesitated, his eyes locked on mine. If they find out, they won't, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. There's a gap in the fence near the creek. Head east. He looked at me one last time, then slipped through the back of the pen, disappearing into the brush. I waited a few seconds before turning to follow, but the guard's shout stopped me cold. Hey, stop right there! I ran. The sound of boots and gunfire tore through the air. Bullets struck the ground near my feet as I dashed through the grass, heart hammering, lungs burning. I didn't look back. The creek was just ahead, glinting under the sun. I stumbled through the water, slipping on the rocks, and scrambled up the far bank. When I finally stopped, he was waiting for me beneath the cottonwoods, his chest rising and falling with quick breaths. For a moment, we just stared at each other. The world spinning around us. You shouldn't have done that, he said. I couldn't let them kill you, I replied. You'd have done the same, he shook his head, almost smiling. You don't know what you've done. They'll come after you now. I looked back toward the ranch, smoke curling into the sky from the northern ridge. They already were, I said. We hid in the trees as the sound of horses thundered past. The men rode hard toward the fire, unaware we were so close. The danger wasn't over, not by a long stretch, but for the first time. I could breathe. As the afternoon wore on, he led me deeper into the hills. The land changed around us, the air cooler, the light dimmer beneath the canopy of pine and oak. I didn't know where he was taking me, only that it was farther from everything I had ever known. At last we stopped, near a small clearing where the remains of an old campfire lay. You should go back, he said quietly. If they find you missing, they'll know. I can't, I said. If I go back, they'll see it in my face. They'll know what I did. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then you've crossed a line you can't return from. Maybe he was right. But as I looked around at the vast, wild land stretching in every direction, I felt something stir in me, a mix of fear and freedom. In the distance, thunder rolled again. The valley was darkening, not from the storm alone, but from the smoke and shadows that had always lingered there. Somewhere my father was hunting for the man I had just saved. And if he found out the truth that his own daughter had betrayed him, for the one he called his enemy, the storm that followed would tear everything apart. But standing there, with the carved token warm in my hand and the sound of the wind whispering through the pines, I knew there was no turning back. The fight between our worlds had only just begun, and somehow I was caught in the middle of it. The forest grew darker as the day faded, the last light of evening slipping through the branches in thin streaks of gold. My breath came quick and uneven as we climbed higher into the hills, the earth soft beneath our feet. The air smelled of pine and smoke, and every rustle made my heart jump. I didn't know where he was leading me, only that we had to stay ahead of my father's men. Somewhere below, I could still hear the faint echoes of voices carried by the wind. They were searching. I knew that sound, to well the hunt had begun. He moved quietly, as though part of the forest itself, his steps sure, even in the half-dark. I tried to match his pace, but my dress snagged on branches and my boots slipped on loose soil. He stopped once to steady me, his hand firm against my arm. We can't stay here, he whispered. They'll follow the river. We have to reach the ridge before nightfall. I nodded, though my legs burned with exhaustion. My father's face flashed through my mind, his anger, his disbelief when he'd discover what I'd done. I couldn't think about that now. I couldn't think about anything except moving forward. When we reached a narrow pass between two rock walls, he stopped suddenly, crouching low. I froze beside him. Voices drifted through the air again, closer this time, along with the creak of saddle leather. A horse snorted somewhere beyond the ridge. My chest tightened. He turned to me, his eyes dark and calm. Stay here, he said. No, I whispered. You can't go out there. They'll see you. They'll see us both if we don't do something, he said. Then softer, trust me. Before I could answer, he slipped into the shadows, moving so quietly it was as if he vanished. I pressed myself against the rock, trying to steady my breathing. The wind carried fragments of words orders, curses, the clink of metal. I could make out Daniel's voice among them, low and urgent, trying to reason with my father. She's gone, Daniel said. She must have run when the fire started. My father's reply was sharp. She wouldn't just vanish. Someone took her. Closed my eyes, praying they'd believe Daniel's lie. But then came the sound of hooves turning, the men spreading out, fanning through the trees. They were closing in. A moment later, a hand brushed my shoulder. I nearly cried out, but it was him, signaling for silence. He pointed to a narrow path winding upward through the rocks. This way, he whispered. We climbed until my legs felt like they might give out. The air grew thinner, cooler. When we finally reached the top, the forest opened into a wide plateau covered in silver grass that shimmered under the rising moon. The valley stretched below us, the ranch faint in the distance, its lights flickering like fireflies. For the first time, I saw it as he must have seen a tan island of fences and smoke cutting into the wild land that had once belonged to his people. He stood beside me, his face lit by the moonlight. They won't stop, he said quietly. Your father will keep hunting. I know, I said, but he's wrong about you. About all of this. He shook his head. It doesn't matter what he believes. To him, I'm already guilty. There was something in his voice's exigation, maybe, or sorrow, that made my chest ache. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him he wasn't alone, but before I could, a flash of light caught my eye from below. Torches. They had found our trail. We have to move, he said. we crossed the plateau. Heading toward the far side where the land sloped into a narrow canyon, the sound of pursuit grew louder behind us. The night came alive with shouts and the crack of gunfire. A bullet struck the rock near my shoulder, sending shards flying. I stumbled and he caught my hand, pulling me forward. We ran, dodging between boulders. The thunder of hooves growing closer. My lungs burned. The path narrowed until it ended at a steep drop overlooking the canyon below. The river shimmered far beneath us, black and cold in the moonlight. There was no way across, no way down without falling. He turned to me, breathing hard. "They'll be here any moment." I looked behind us. Torches were already flickering through the trees. There was nowhere to hide. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer right away. His eyes darted to the cliffs on the far side, then back to me. "If they catch us, they'll kill me, and they'll make you watch." Fear surged through me, but I refused to let it take hold. "Then we don't let them catch us." He gave me a strange look, half disbelief, half admiration. "You don't scare easily, do you?" "Not anymore," I said. He moved to the edge, scanning the canyon. There was a narrow ledge below, just wide enough for a person to walk if they were careful. "We can climb down there," he said. "Follow the ledge to the bend. It'll take us to the lower pass." I glanced at the drop. It was at least 50 feet down, the rocks slick with moss. One wrong move, and we'd fall into the river. But there was no other choice. He went first, lowering himself over the edge, gripping the rock with practiced ease. When he reached the ledge, he looked up and motioned for me to follow. I tried not to look down as I climbed, my fingers scraping against the cold stone. Halfway down, the sound of voices echoed above. They'd reached the plateau. "Hurry," he whispered. I reached the ledge just as my father's voice rang out. "Spread out. Don't let them get away." We moved along the narrow path, pressed tight to the rock. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else. The ledge curved sharply, and for a moment we were hidden from view. But then a torchlight flickered behind us. One of the riders had spotted movement. A gunshot rang out, the bullet sparking against the wall inches from my head. I gasped, losing my footing for a second. He caught my wrist, pulling me back. His hand was steady, strong. "Don't stop," he said. "Keep moving." We rounded the bend and reached a small overhang where we could catch our breath. From there we could see the valley far below, the lights of the ranch now faint specks against the dark horizon. The sight made something twist inside me. That had been my whole world once. And now, it felt like a place I could never return to. "They won't stop until they find us," I said. He nodded. "Then we'll make sure they can't." We stayed there until the noise above began to fade. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. The storm that had been threatening all night was finally breaking. Distant thunder rolled across the canyon, and a few drops began to fall, turning the rocks slick beneath our feet. "We have to find shelter," he said. "There's a cave near the ridge. We can wait there until dawn." We climbed carefully along the ledge until we reached a narrow opening in the rock face. Inside, the air was cool and damp, smelling of earth and rain. He started a small fire with flint and dry bark he carried in a pouch. The faint light danced across the walls, revealing ancient carvings, shapes of men and animals etched into the stone. "These are from my ancestors," he said softly. "They believed the spirits of the land lived here." I traced one of the carvings with my fingers, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. "Do you still believe that?" I asked. He looked into the fire, the light flickering in his eyes. "I believe the land remembers everything. Every wound, every promise broken." His words hung heavy between us. I thought of the fences, the burned fields, the endless fighting. I thought of my father's hatred and how it had shaped every part of our lives. Maybe the land did remember. Maybe that was why peace had never lasted. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Rain drummed against the rocks, and lightning flashed across the mouth of the cave. He stood near the entrance, watching. I could tell he was restless, his mind already planning the next move. "We can't stay long," he said. "When the rain stops, They'll follow the trail again. I rose, wrapping my arms around myself for warmth. Then what happens? Where will we go? He turned toward me, his expression serious. There's a place north of here. My people still hold it. If we can reach it, you'll be safe. And you? I asked. He hesitated. If they catch me, they'll hang me. If I run, I can lead them away from you. No, I said quickly. I'm not letting you go alone. He took a step closer, his gaze steady. You don't understand. Your father won't stop. He'll come himself if he has to. He's not chasing me anymore. He's chasing you. His words hit hard. I knew he was right. My father wouldn't rest until he brought me back. Kor destroyed what had taken me from him. Lightning flashed again. And for a moment, I saw his face clearly in the light strong, determined and filled with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was fear. Maybe love. Maybe both. The wind howled through the canyon like a warning. I could almost hear my father's voice carried in it, calling my name. We stood there, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling low between us. The air was thick with unspoken words, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down. The night felt endless, and yet I knew dawn would come soon. When it did, something would have to break. Either the chase would endure, everything would. Morning came quiet and gray. The storm having passed with only the soft dripping of water from the rocks above, the cave was damp and cold, and the air smelled of smoke from the fire that had gone out sometime in the night. I woke to the sound of footsteps outside, faint but close enough to stir my heart into a heavy rhythm. He was already standing at the mouth of the cave, his hand on the hilt of his knife. Eyes fixed on the mist rising from the canyon below. They're near, me said without turning. I moved to his side, peering into the valley. Through the fog, I could see movement of few riders crossing the ridge, their silhouettes dark against the pale sky. My father's men had found our trail again. He looked at me, his expression calm but tense. You need to go down through the river path. It'll take you north, toward the open plains. They won't expect you to take that way. What about you? I asked. He didn't answer right away. His silence told me more than words could. I stepped closer, gripping his arm. You're not staying behind. I have to, he said quietly. If they see us both, they'll never stop. But if I lead them away, you'll have a chance. I shook my head, refusing to accept it. You'll be killed. He looked away, his jaw tightening. Maybe, but you'll live. And that's enough. The mist thickened as we stood there, neither of us willing to let go. I wanted to tell him everything I hadn't said, the gratitude, the fear, the strange hope that had carried me through the night, but the words caught in my throat. Finally, he placed his hand gently against my face. Don't look back, he said. Promise me. I nodded, though it felt like something inside me was breaking. He led me to the narrow passage that opened toward the river, helping me climb down the slick rocks. I turned once, but he had already vanished into the fog, moving silently toward the sound of approaching horses. The descent was steep and dangerous, but I forced myself onward, slipping and sliding down the wet path until I reached the riverbank. The water was icy and swift, carrying branches and foam from the night storm. I followed it north, staying close to the edge where the trees grew thick. Hours passed before I dared to stop. The sound of gunfire echoed faintly from the cliffs above, sharp and distant. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what had happened, but I could imagine too well. I kept walking, each step heavier than the last, until the noise faded behind me. By nightfall, the land began to change. The canyon opened into wide meadows, the grass tall and golden beneath the fading light. The air smelled clean again, untouched. I found a small rise overlooking the valley and rested there, staring up at the stars that were just beginning to appear. For the first time in days, I felt safe, though the ache in my chest made it hard to breathe. I thought about the life I had left behind the ranch, the people, my father's iron rules that had shaped every part of who I was. I had run from all of it, and yet some part of me knew I could never truly escape. Not until I faced him. When morning came again, I made my way back. The trail was quiet, the forest still, except for the soft call of birds. I followed the familiar ridges until I reached the edge of our land. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the ranch house, thin and steady. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt as it once had. Daniel was the first to see me. He was tending to a wounded horse near the corral, and his eyes widened when he recognized me. "You're alive," he said, his voice breaking with relief. "We thought—" He stopped, glancing toward the main house. "Where's my father?" I asked. He hesitated. "Inside, he hasn't slept. Not since that night." The air felt heavy as I walked to the porch. The door creaked as I pushed it open. My father sat by the window, staring out toward the hills, his rifle leaning against the wall beside him. He looked older than I remembered, his face drawn and pale. When he turned, silence between us stretched like a wire ready to snap. His eyes searched mine, full of things neither of us knew how to say. "You came back," he said at last. "I had to," I replied softly. "I needed to know." He looked past me as if expecting someone else. When he realized I was alone, something in his shoulders sagged. "The men found him," he said after a long pause. "He drew them away from you. Didn't he fire a shot?" "Just ran, until—" He stopped, unable to finish. I felt my knees weaken. I reached for the table to steady myself, my throat burning. He was gone. The truth settled over me like the dust in the still air, quiet, final, unbearable. My father looked at me again, his voice rough. "You don't understand what kind of man he was." "I do," I interrupted. "Better than you ever will." He flinched as though my words had struck him. I could see the struggle in his eyes, pride, regret, love, and something deeper he didn't know how to name. For the first time, I realized how much of his hatred had been built from fear of losing control. Fear of the world changing faster than he could bear. We stood in silence until I spoke again. He saved me. You may call him an enemy, but he was more human than anyone I've ever known. My father said nothing. His hands trembled slightly, and then he looked away. "Go rest," he said quietly. "You've been through enough." But rest didn't come. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind move through the grass outside, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine. Every sound reminded me of him, the quiet strength in his voice. The way he looked at the world as if it still belonged to something sacred. Days passed. Life at the ranch returned to its slow rhythm, but nothing felt the same. My father spoke little, his anger softened into silence. Sometimes I saw him standing by the fence line, staring out toward the distant hills. And I wondered if he thought of the man he'd hunted, or the daughter he'd nearly lost. I began to ride north again whenever I could, following the river that had carried me to safety. Each time I brought something small, a token, a memory. One day it was a carved pendant he had left behind in the cave. Another day a wildflower I'd found growing near the cliffs. I left them where the ledge met the canyon, where the wind never stopped moving. Seasons changed. The valley grew quiet, and the scars of the fire faded into green again. But some things never healed completely. I came to understand that pain could shape people as deeply as love, and sometimes both live side by side. Years later, when I told the story to others, I spoke not of tragedy, but of courage. Of how two people from different worlds had met between the fences and the wild, and how one act of mercy could change everything. I never spoke his name aloud, but I carried it in my heart wherever I went. The land, too, remembered. The carvings in the cave, the stones along the river, they stood as quiet witnesses to a time when everything was uncertain and yet full of hope. Sometimes, when the wind rose through the canyon, I could almost hear his voice again, calm and steady, reminding me to keep moving forward. My father grew old in the years that followed. Before he passed, he called me to his side. His hand was weak, but his eyes were clear. "You were right," he said. "About him, about everything." I held his hand until his breathing slowed, a strange peace settling between us at last. There were no more fences between us, only the open land beyond. Now, whenever I ride north, I stop by the ridge where the grass still bends with the wind. The world feels wide and endless there, just as it did that night. I close my eyes and listen, and in the hush of the plains, I find the same quiet strength that once guided me through fear and loss. The story ends not in sorrow, but in remembrance. Promise kept between two souls from different worlds, bound by something stronger than hate. The wild still whispers his name, and the river keeps carrying it north, toward the horizon where the sun rises over free land. Top of form, bottom of form,